Okay, so I'm gonna. People can hear me on the recording. Maybe better. There we go. All right. So I'm here to talk about hostdb again, everyone's most favorite feature. Right. That's it. That's all I want to say. No. So what is hostdb again? Because people don't know what it is; they just hate it, which is, good stance to have. So it's not just DNS. Everyone just says it's just DNS. It does more than DNS. It breaks things. So basically, hostdb is this thing that stores all these hostdb info struct things, which includes basically like a host name, IP, serve info thing, and then some concept of up-down status for a given reel. This includes all around robin records, which is just like a list of reels, and a bunch of selection methods for like, round robin, town round robin. I got a list farther in this thing, but they're all lies, all of them. And some sort of async persistence to disk, which is optional, although I very much like having it, although Leif hates it, just like GitHub. So that's okay. So how does hostdb work? It's got this one main call path probe. There's a bunch of wrappers around it for like doing evaluation or some other thing or whatever. But it's basically you get an item from this cache, whatever this cache is. Check a bunch of things to make sure the world didn't crash down around you and that thing is a valid thing, and you return it. And that way the HTTPSM can get a hostdb info, so I can go talk to some reel. That's all it really does. So I talked about this at the last summit some. So here's some things that have been fixed since then. So now you can turn on SRV records on a per transaction basis. So that's kind of nice. So you don't have to turn it on for the world, just for certain things.
You actually use that?
Yes, I do.
Wow.
SRV records are awesome.
Well, no, I mean per transaction.
Yeah, because I want to turn it on for a certain set of things and not all things.
Via remap?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so you can use conf remap, and now you can turn it on for some things. Now you can ramp it up and that sort of stuff, which is nice. Fixing priorities. SRV records used to hard code to always look up _HTTP TCP, which sucks if you want to do HTTPS. So now it does that properly. A bunch of other random stuff. But the big one since last time is that I finished the big rewrite of the hostdb caching system, which is, people probably won't notice, except that stuff will stop crashing so much. So.
And things are great. Well, we've been having fun at Yahoo in that because the parameters changed and we set those to tweak it every time we upgrade past 5.3, it looks like you're shut down because hostdb simply doesn't work and you don't get any interesting error messages.
Right, it just doesn't resolve any access.
It just stops resolving.
Isn't that the failure mode you want, though? When there's no space, just take the whole process down.
Well, it doesn't take the process down. It just doesn't answer.
Yeah, it's just sitting off in the corner all coy, like, oh. So some background about the old caching system so that people can appreciate how garbage it was. It's called multicache, not multi because it's templated or anything, but actually because it actually did this weird split of having a statically allocated spaces, number of objects, and less dynamic space of stuff, which was a bit of a mess. And so the dynamic side was split into two sides, and we basically just hand out pointers until we ran out of space. And we go to the other one, and then hand out all those pointers until we ran out of space. And then we just started handing back out the pointers in the first block.
It did do some sort of GC. It was
yeah, with the leveling and stuff.
Generation GC was done well.
No, it also turns out that the way it was doing the GC, once it went past the first level, make the object unfindable, which was awesome. So there were some bugs in there. And basically, it took that big memory block, in addition to splitting it into two, made some number of partitions, each had a lock, and it was all big mmap thing. And so all the persistence to disk was basically some background continuation, which would come lock the partition, msync it to disk, and unlock the partition, which is pretty slow, and why most people hate the old syncing stuff, because it was so slow. So that's the primary issue that I ran into a lot was performance-wise, you see huge, weird latency spikes because, it'll lock it, and if your disks are busy, it might take 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds. And so a 64th of domain names that you're trying to look up just gets stuck.
Yeah, we saw this periodic latency that we got complained about, and it turned out we turned off hostdb syncing.
I got a graph later. I'll show you. But yeah, so that was one of the big problems. There's all this magic dynamic sizing stuff. So the way it tried to pick how big that dynamic size was based off of magic and lies. Did a lot of naked pointers all over creation, which was not great because you didn't know who was pointing at what or anything. It was really easily corrupted because it just M-syncing occasionally, and so it would get shut down or partially synced out. It crashes when full. The configs are confusing. It crashes when it's not full. Just problems. So hostdb had some issues.
Yeah, when you're forward proxy, the full thing was a much bigger issue.
Right.
It was really hard to figure out how big enough was.
Right. Well, an interesting thing, if you have syncing enabled, as you make it bigger, it makes your M-syncs take longer, which makes the performance get worse, which then makes it die faster in different ways.
But we got to be careful. People might think we didn't like it.
Oh, sorry. No, we loved. No, I don't want to bash on it too much. It got us this far, so whatever. It did a thing. Now we have a better one. So for the rewrite, the basic requirements I had for it was like no more naked pointers. We want to ref count the memory. We don't really want to malloc where possible. Like free listing is still a good thing for reasons. We want to have a configurable memory size limits or item size limits instead of all this black magic inside of trying to guess based off of things that you said. And then some wish lists of better syncing the disk. Metrics would be nice because the old multicache had like few metrics and most of them were wrong. And preferably something we could reuse for stuff. So the current caching system is this refcount cache. It's not a great name, but it's very descriptive. And it's a nice, templated thing. It's got a constructor. You pass in the number of partitions, and then everything else is optional. You can either the number of items or how big the cache is allowed to be. And it just basically has get, put, erase. That's it. Nothing terribly fancy. And all it does is work on ref count objects. So you can when you put it into the cache, doesn't actually put it in the cache, just increases the ref count. So the cache is effectively just a big map of pointers to things, ref count pointers to things. So some example usage from the tests, which you might not be able to read because whatever, but it does a thing. It kind of looks like a container, whatever. The serialization to disk is very different than the previous one. So instead of doing all this M mapping, M syncing stuff, what I actually do now is since we just have all these nice ref counts, I can come in and lock a partition, bump the ref counts on everything in the partition, and then release the lock. And then I can go write it later at some point. So this way, the syncing to disk, you're only holding the lock for long enough to bump the ref counts and all the items in your partition, which is pretty darn fast. And then that's the write process. So it writes it to some other file, then moves it over, so that way it's more or less atomic, so that way you don't end up with partially written files and nonsense. Not perfect, but works pretty well. So with that, we have simpler. It also let us simplify the hostdb info structs because they were storing all these weird checksum pointers and MD5 things and all sorts of stuff to try and do error correction, except by not doing error correction. Now it's all ref counted. It's also templated, so other things can use it, although I'm not sure who all else needs this sort of thing, but it's all there. Async to disk, there's tests for it, which did leak memory until Brian fixed them. Thank you for that, by the way. And performance. So this graph is fun. So the blue one here, this blue line here at about 3.5 milliseconds or so, is our average latency for a request that does nothing. Just go to hostdb, get a thing, and return. And this was with syncing enabled. So we were seeing on average about a 3 millisecond latency hit just from syncing things to disk. And it's got actually significantly worse if you made the cache big, because this is, once again, an average. And so Theo is like cringing over here. What this means is that most of the time, it's fine. Some of the times, it's terrible. And so we're averaging 3, which is pretty bad. So we decided we would just go turn off the syncing. And so that's what that green one is. But then you still see there's some weird spikes, which is really weird. Actually, turns out it crashes if you turn off the syncing for other reasons. But also, even without the crashing, it's still slightly slower because of all the locking nonsense, because it doesn't actually turn off the syncing. It just doesn't M-sync. It doesn't turn off all the locking and stuff, just the M-syncing. It also did some other problems where it was actually syncing in the etnet threads, which was a whole other problem. But I have other graphs for that, which are more interesting. But that's where all the big spikes that were coming from before with all the cache. And so this nice red line that's nice and flat down here at the bottom is the new one running. Interesting fact, we only keep track of most of the timings in traffic server in millisecond granularity. So if you're faster than a millisecond, you have no idea. So this average is a nice 1, because if you have anything that took any amount of time, it has to be 1 or more. So we should fix that at some point, because now we're faster than 1, so we should do it. But that's cool. So what does this all mean? Performance is better, no more crashing, which is nice. There's also a bunch of metrics that are in there now. So they're all under this namespace proxy process hostdb cache. So they've got like the total number of items, size of the items, hit rates, those sorts of things, all there, so you can actually keep track of them and see how big your cache is. Fun fact, like the old one used to default to like a meg or 12 megs or something for the cache size, but like on ours, granted reverse proxies, ours we're only using about like 30K of space. So most people's caches have been way too big, but just interesting fact. And there's configuration, so you can limit on size, items, whatever you want. And the failure modes are much better. So in the previous one, when hostdb, as Susan was saying, if it started up and it didn't work, or if your cache got full, you'd get all sorts of weird things, like either it would segfault or your all DNS lookups would fail all the time, which was awesome. So in this new one, instead, if the cache is full, all we do is just not cache it, because it's just a cache. So if the cache is full, you can still get responses. You can still talk to things. It's quite nice.
Yeah, so that's going to be a significant performance impact, but it's still better than failing, way better.
Right, it does mean that you're going to make a ton of DNS queries, so don't fill up your cache, but it does mean that things will continue to function, which is much better.
Have eviction of not does it evict?
Yes, so the current one, I didn't have that in here in the slide. So the current one does have an eviction policy set up with it. So when you insert the item, you can specify when it'll expire, and then it'll evict them as it needs the space. So it's not like garbage collecting all the time, only when it needs to. And that's using that priority queue stuff that was made by one of the Masos, I think.
They're interchangeable.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but if you're only using 30K anyway, for a year, you probably just, why check the size at all? I mean, if you're a reverse proxy, you've got a finite universe of things you're going to resolve.
Oh, sure.
But in the forward proxy realm,
Yeah, the forward proxy's harder.
it seems like if you track the frequency of use on, if you use it at like an exponential weighted frequency of use perspective on each record, and put that in a priority queue, then when you fill it up and you go to insert, it's probably better to evict something that's old than it is to just continue to look up something new and hot every time.
Right. So it will evict things if there's not enough space, I believe, depending on your limits.
Only if they're old, too old, right? They're expired.
Isn't it what's touched last recently? If you're using the priority queue, do they get bumped? Is that based on expiry time? Or?
It is based on expiry time.
So when they expire, you dump them.
So when they expire, you dump them. If they don't, I think they are stuck around for now. That's easy enough to change to make it so that we're allowed to dump things.
The challenge of not having some sort of frequency indicator in there is that you're no longer scan resistant.
Right. The old hostdb also didn't deal with that.
For sure.
Easy change. Yeah, I can totally add that to allow for us evicting things that are not expired. That's not hard.
And I should also point out you can tune the expiration, so you can put a maximum to say no DNS record, no matter what they tell me, it expires in more than 12 hours, 24 hours, or
right.
whatever.
Right, and in that case where they're doing a scan, worst case you're just going to make a bunch of queries. I mean, that still functioning. So assuming whatever you're talking to DNS-wise is okay, then you're still okay.
You turn sync to 0 and it'll work.
Yeah, and if you turn sync off, it'll stop syncing stuff. Although there's no noticeable performance difference, at least in my experience.
But if for some reason you wanted to.
Yeah, but for some reason, like you're Leif and you hate syncing things to disk, you can turn off the syncing.
It is handy. I think we should probably keep it on because it makes the restarts much faster.
Yeah,
especially in the reverse proxy case. It's not so much in the forward proxy case because
Other way around.
No, it's actually useful in both cases, but the other one that I really like, the main reason I like it is if the DNS infra fails, stuff still works. Because I personally, I've got all the stuff set up so that it's like surf stale while we validate, or surf stale 4 is what it's called. And so that way, if I restart, I've still got some stale records, and if the DNS resolvers are dead, I can continue functioning until the resolvers come back up. That's the main reason I like it. But it would also help with the startup, having to reload all DNS entries from all of time, which is pretty expensive. Yeah.
So what happens currently with the current version if you have just a whole bunch of lookups and does it mostly function or does it just eventually stop?
What do you mean by
So let's say you're running in forward proxy mode and there's a bunch of different clients going to just whole internet.
Right, so it depends on how you've configured this. So assuming you have the defaults, which I believe set a size and item count limit, once you hit those limits, you'll stop caching them. right? So they just won't go in until they expire, right? Or sorry, like it'll be full, and as they expire, you might put more in, but you won't burn up more memory. You can actually turn all those limits off, but so if you did, this would be memory exhaustion attack. Don't do that. But I mean, if you really wanted, you could, but I wouldn't recommend.
So with the new changes here, it's handled a little.
Right, because before what would happen is you'd come in and try and do a lookup and it'd say, I don't have space, you don't get a lookup response, and so you get a DNS lookup failure. Now, if it's full and there's no more space, it will actually do the DNS lookup, get you a response, and shove it out. Now, you do get some benefits from not caching, but if you have like 10 requests for the same thing at the same time, it actually does dedupe those. So like if you have 10 requests, they'll do one DNS lookup and all 10 will get the response. But then if somebody does it again in a second, you'll still have to make a
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. So one other thing that I wanted to point out in hostdb stuff that people don't remember is there's these old ancient like endpoints for like testing, getting stats and stuff out of things. We got rid of some of these for like the internal stats for the main traffic server process. hostdb has one. Most of the endpoints aren't terribly helpful. Well, actually, you can force lookups, you can force reverse lookups and those sorts of things, but the one that I use the most is this show all endpoint, which Brian Geffen actually helped throw this format JSON thing in here, so you can actually just dump the whole hostdb in JSON format, which is awesome. So if you're seeing weird DNS responses or stuff going to weird places, you can just dump the whole thing as it is. And this includes whether it was stale, timed out, what it was, the IP, the name, because we actually now store all the names of the things that you've ever looked up. So like we don't just have IP, so you can actually see what the heck you did. And this also works for round robin records. It doesn't fit on one column, sorry about that. But so you can actually see here that the main record was, coke.com, because that's what we use in our integration tests. I don't know why, but we do. And so those are the multiple round robin records for that main record. So you can see all these sorts of things. So I do this so I can actually pull metrics and stuff off of the DNS cache itself to do some testing and whatnot. But it's there. Feel free and use it. We should probably pull this out into a plugin instead of doing it in the core, but it's there for now.
So speaking of round robin, so is it Sarah host do round robin now? Can I put in multiple records for the same FQDN to get a round robin effect?
Yeah. So round robin records.
Your original version did. Original replacement for the original version didn't do that.
Original replacement for the.
So I put in the host etc. host thing.
Oh, a hosts file.
Yeah, the hosts file.
I'm not sure if it. I don't think it does, only because hosts files don't support it.
Yeah, they do.
Well, no, like Linux doesn't, and like Mac doesn't. Yes, you can put multiple entries in for the same name, but that's not parse them. We can support that easily. I'm not sure if I added that or not. Because I remember you asked that.
Yeah, the prior version lets you do that because it was really handy if you were, because most of the use is for testing, and so the ability to set up actual round robin records via the host file was quite useful.
I think we do now. The other thing that I guess I didn't mention in here is that I did change up how the host file integration stuff works with hostdb. Before, the host file stuff was like a background process that made all the hostdb infos and then like intercepted the call to like throw back the hostdb info responses. Now what I do is I overload that down at the do DNS layer. So what this means is a couple things. One, like all the round robin stuff would be really easy to add in there because you don't have to like know all the things. You just return a DNS response which has more things in it. But second, this also means for host files we actually can keep track of up-down status of reals. Because the previous one, what it would do is since you're returning the same hostdb info record regardless of port, you were keeping track of the up-down ended status of everything.
Yeah, that was an issue with the way the hostdb was structured, the port versus non-port, because you couldn't get the port data out of the host, etc. host.
Right. So by now shoving it down into the do DNS layer, it's just another, and that makes more sense.
It's just a DNS resolution.
So that's there. So yeah, you can use host files. I mean, I don't, but you can. It works.
Well, I get actually asked about that. So
yeah, the big one I noticed people wanted to do is localhost a lot.
Yeah, localhost. But honestly, in some of the testing we've done, and some of look at the test farm, the ability to put my own etc. host there and override any DNS, or simply not allow it to talk to DNS and have control, is not a small thing.
Interesting. Other thing that I also didn't put in the slides, which I can add later, you can also specify, like you already were able to specify your own resolvers, so you can point at your own resolvers if you want. I also added in support for port numbers in the resolve conf. So you can actually run your resolver on not 53 and traffic server can talk to it, which is nice because actually some of the integration tests that I've got set up for hostdb use that. So I set up my own resolver, and that way I can test, the resolver returning garbage or being unavailable or whatever.
Yeah, Persia, are you going to talk a little bit about that later? About our resolver for the replay stuff?
For the replay stuff, yeah.
Okay, because we use it, Persia did some stuff with a similar technique.
Yeah, so yeah, resolve comp, you can tell traffic server to point at whatever resolver you want with a port number. So that way you don't have to do any magics, which is nice.
We have like but everything points to the microserver.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you were going to mention that.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil it.
All right, cool. And then basically what's left for hostdb stuff, there's some origin selection, which I think is next or after somebody they're going to talk about. It would probably be good to expose some of this hostdb stuff to plugins, so plugins could do this primarily so that I could get the stats thing out of the core and pull it into a plugin, because that would be nicer. We don't have all that weird HTML stuff in.
We might want to consider. I mean, I did like 3 or 4 years ago, I did a thing about the whole redoing this hostdb, and one thing would be nice to have a plugin where you can let the plugins can be called for DNS resolution.
Right.
Not to do real DNS resolution, but to do
Return
something
things.
instead.
Right. I'm going to talk about that some in the origin selection stuff. I think that's all I got for these slides. So yeah, any other questions about hostdb stuff? Things that people really love hostdb? No one cares about hostdb.
Right, so one of my engineers tells me that the traffic server APIs don't support reverse lookups. Is there any truth in that?
That's possible. I'm not sure if there's a plugin API for doing resolution stuff directly. Traffic server does support doing reverse lookups, but I don't know if there's a plugin API for it.
Shouldn't be too hard to add.
Yeah, this is my line here for API to call into. There's very few, if any, plugin APIs to talk to hostdb. You end up talking to hostdb indirectly by setting the name or the IP, and then the state machine does it.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is something that I brought up because it would be useful for a variety of things that you want to do DNS resolution. It'd be nice to just leverage all the nice asyncy, cachy magic stuff down here.
Because we're already doing it, right? I mean, it's all the code's already there.
Right, we already got all the code. We just got to make a wrapper out into plugin land. Yeah, so I'm not sure.
Thanks for the
There
URL.
are some APIs for this. Just looking right now, there's the CS host lookups.
Yeah, there's an API for regular lookups, but not
Right.
reverse.
I don't see anything for the reverse.
Yeah. And for the lookups, I'm not sure that you're able to set resolution type or force queries or that sort of stuff as well. There's a few flags you can do in the hostdb lookup to like force a DNS lookup to other things. I'm sure that those are all exposed, which would be better to do. So in the future.
This might be a bigger conversation, but I tried to do the URL, which I think is great to try to see what's inside the hostdb time. And there seems to be some kind of cycle because I'm doing a transparent proxy, so where localhost is redirected. Wondering how if there's a different way to get to that URL.
So to use that URL, you have to enable the stats things and then add a remap entry with the little magic curly bracket thing.
Okay.
It's terribleness. It's old, but yes, that's how you get that to work.
Okay, thank you.
So is this the one that's checked in right now in 7.1 or 7?
Yes. So this got merged in right before the 7 release.
Okay.
Sorry if you're on anything before 7. You have the old multicache stuff, which has some problem.
And it's unlike a fix. Really, I just don't see backporting in this.
I did backport it to our internal builds of 5 and 6. It's possible, but I don't know if Phil's going to be cool with me doing such a big backport to an LTS release. So we'll see. I put in some workarounds into 6.2, so 6.2 is not so bad as 5, but it's just cheating.
Actually, that was my second question. Was it how bad was it backporting to 6.2?
6.2 was not so bad. 5 was a big pain because a lot of stuff changed between 5 and 7, obviously. But 6 wasn't so bad. So I was actually considering making like a 6 branch off my GitHub that has it backported, and then people could use it. I don't really want to support it if we're not going to take it upstream. So we'll see, I guess. I'm not sure who all here is running 6.2 out in production.
6.1?
Yeah, whatever. Some version of 6 something. Like you guys having massive problems with hostdb or like happy enough?
See visuals.
Any issues? Okay, maybe we should backport it. I don't know. You'll have to convince Phil. Buy him enough beers or something.
Yeah, there's some workarounds that make it livable. I mean, you can set the sync frequency down, because doesn't tend to fill up all that fast. You can just make the numbers big to have more space, so you don't have the GC as option.
If I remember, the backport to 6 wasn't horrific. It's just a question of whether we want to do a big, subsystem replace on a LTS release.
I'm not enthusiastic.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the go-to for that. We've been running it for, I don't know, since June. 4 months without issue, so I don't know. So that's the answer. Anything else? All right.